Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining today. I'm really excited to present with Nahali on this as well. So let me go ahead and share my screen. We've got a little presentation for you all. So as you can see, we've got a big announcement of our TCFDW project. So I'll let Nahali start with a quick introduction.
Hi everyone, so lovely to meet all of you. Looking forward to chatting in the breakout sessions later. My name's Nahali Nupriya. I work for the President of the United Nations General Assembly, focusing mostly on climate, small island states, and sustainable development. And over to you, JC.
Yes, and so my name's JC Weathers, and I'm an account executive with the BenyComms team. And one of my main passions in my job is being the community manager of this Women in Climate Tech community. So you've probably seen me posting in the LinkedIn group and Slack channels. So I'm really excited to help coordinate this community. And so to start, I really just want to give an overview of who we are because we've grown a lot. So Women in Climate Tech, we've got a huge community. We just surpassed 360 members, which is a huge benchmark. It's so many people, amazing minds. And we've got tons of organizations. We couldn't even get close to fitting everyone's logo on this page, but this is just us at a glance. And we come from all corners of the world. Having a really global member base is something that's super exciting. And I hope that we can keep growing this. And we have a bunch of different company sizes, from startups to huge corporations. We cover so many different roles in our careers, and we also carry so many different titles. And so with all of these different dimensions to our membership, we're really excited to tap into the genius that is Women in Climate Tech. So we have a really exciting opportunity to get further involved and actually do something that will change the world, we think.
So just kind of outlining what the idea here is. We've all got very big ideas of what we want the world to look like 10, 15, 20 years from now, for ourselves, for the people we care about, for those yet to come. And we're really thinking about how to leverage the most impact for what is an incredibly rapidly changing space amongst the expectations that are put on companies, on organizations, on teams, to really change how they think about their practices. So we've started the journey on thinking about climate-related risk disclosure. So that's what the TCFD is, disclosing financial risks that will come or are coming from climate impacts. But what we really want to do is start thinking about how to think about gender and gender equity as a way to access a higher amount of change whilst we're going through a transition process already. So why? Women are the most at risk from the negative effects of climate change. They're already some of the most marginalized people in most communities across the world. And they're always on the front lines of disasters when they happen, both slow form and those that happen more quickly. They're essential to reducing emissions. So women have been shown in the US to be responsible for almost 75% of consumer-related decisions. So to completely forget about this axis is to really be shooting ourselves in the foot with limiting the scope of impact that any of our changes could be making, that any of our campaigns could be making. And lastly, it's critical to national and international security. So when we forget about half of the world, when we're talking about these transitions, we're forgetting about a really large decision-making portion of our global population, and also the significant role that women play in their communities, in their households, in their countries, as managers of conflict and reducing the tensions that can exist within and between communities. So we're really trying to look at how to bring the climate crisis and climate action together with gender equity. Next slide, please. So what exactly is the TCFDW? We're looking at this as a way of enacting change. We're trying to build a coalition of talent to develop a framework that focuses on studying, quantifying, thinking about the issue of bringing in female input into addressing climate risk. So what does that actually look like, and where are we trying to go with this? Over the course of the next few months, we're trying to bring together a team, a tiger team, and JC will talk a little bit about what this is, to join a group of very smart, very ambitious, very dedicated women and allies to work on addressing this problem, with the end goal of creating a toolkit that can be easily stacked onto the existing TCFD for companies going through this transition process. We want people to be asking the right questions to make sure they're not having this critical blind spot still in place by the time they've already gone through this process of trying to become TCFD compliant. So where does this go? Over the course of June, we're going to be choosing applicants, and JC will talk a little bit more about how to get involved with that. Over the course of July and August, we'll start the actual kind of brunt work of this. So weekly or so committee meetings, building what the actual program will look like, building a program of work of, how we'll exactly be splitting up the responsibilities and the work that we need to do, asking the right questions, and drafting the framework. Over August, we'll start tinkering with how we want to present this. So there's no point building a tool that no one's going to use. So really trying to make sure that this is something that doesn't feel like it's totally starting from zero, it's reinventing the wheel. This is something that we want to feel relatively easy to tack onto already existing processes. With a view to, in September, the committee presenting its findings at the NEST Summit during Climate Week in New York.
Yes, so that's a lot of information. And so we just kind of want to break down and drill down on the deliverables. So I think something that Nahali mentioned that we're really excited about is creating a toolkit that is just in the language that these corporations speak, and figuring out a way to just add an additional layer of consideration for gender equity over the already climate risk considerations that they will be doing with the TCFD. So just tacking on that W, making it really easy for them to understand how women have to be an integral solution and consideration if they're considering climate risk. So an outcome of our working group, working sessions, research, and all of this great collaboration, we really want to make sure that it's tangible. So we will be coming up with a toolkit to do that. And we will be showcasing our work. So in addition to the toolkit, we will be showcasing our work at the NEST Summit at Climate Week NYC. So this is a really big opportunity for us to get in front of international organizations that are working together to solve climate change. So this is a really fantastic opportunity to just present all of the insights. So if we come up with insights that aren't necessarily, don't make it into that toolkit or something like that, this is an opportunity to tell everyone about the full bandwidth of our exploration in this. So we're really excited about having multiple opportunities to present all of this information. And so this is just a quick glance at our selection committee. As you can see, we've assembled a fantastic selection committee that spans sectors, including finance, public policy, marketing and communications. And that's because this effort will take cross-sectoral collaboration and just kind of an all hands on deck sort of approach. So we want to encourage anyone who has a background in sustainability compliance, whether it be TCFD or another framework, or if you have a lot of experience in gender equity studies. We need a lot of people to help make sure that this program is as all-encompassing and as great as this group is. So that's kind of a quick glance at our selection committee, and these are the folks that are steering the boat.
So join us. You can apply to join the TCFDW Tiger team by emailing JC. We do have an application process that's in development, but in the meantime, we'd love to hear from you if this sounds interesting, and we could start a conversation from there about what that would look like.
Yeah, and we are also looking for corporate support. So we have some materials. So if you would like to get your company involved, please reach out to Helen. I've listed her email here. So we've got some materials. We'd love to work together and get as much corporate support in support of this, because we know that's what it's going to take to get this off the ground and have as much widespread support as well. So yeah, we're really excited about this initiative. So we're really looking forward to all of the applications coming in and all of that exciting progress we'll make.
Hey everyone, can you guys see me? I just wanted to say a big thank you to JC and Nahali for presenting this. We've been working in a committee now for several weeks, and I sprung this on and said, hey guys, what do you think? And they're like, okay. And they did a fantastic job. I just love hearing this articulated in their voices, and they've been inputting already, and it's been so valuable. We're really excited. Thank you both so much. You did a great job. And we're looking forward to hearing what our members think and hearing from our members on this topic. And feel free also to discuss this with one another in the little networking groups that we'll have after our speech. So thanks, guys.
Yes, thanks.
Sorry, too many buttons. Fantastic, you guys. That is so exciting. And we are really, really excited to see what comes of that. So with that being said, I would like to move us along to our featured speaker, which is Dr. Kimberley Miner. Dr. Miner, she's a scientist at NASA's Jet Propulsion Lab in Pasadena, California. And she looks at Arctic change as part of a joint NASA ESA initiative. She's also an expert on climate security and climate risk assessment. So Kimberley, if you are able to turn your camera on, I will find you on here and spotlight you. There we go. And yeah, feel free to take it away.
Hi, everyone. Good morning from me and good afternoon for East Coasters. I do want to first say that I'm really excited about the announcement that Nahali and JC just made. So I'm really hoping we can talk more about it after I share a little bit about my journey. So thank you for that. Thank you for sharing that with all of us. All right, I'm going to start my presentation. So I was telling folks yesterday that I am going to give you guys a really high level understanding of what I do. It's going to be an iteration of the outreach presentation that I like to do. Lots of pictures, very easy to digest. And then we can, if we want to talk technical details, I'm more than happy to do that. And like folks mentioned, please go ahead and put any questions in the chat box, and I'm happy to chat about that with you guys after we're done. I find it that I have trouble moving around in between topics. So as mentioned, I am Kimberley. I am a scientist at the NASA Jet Propulsion Lab at Caltech and a research assistant professor at the University of Maine. Over the years, I've had a number of collaborations with folks all across the world, including ETH Zurich, University of Alaska. We just finished a project with Nat Geo, often looking at mountain ecosystems that are either glaciated or have a lot of snow impact every year, and the Arctic. I did also just come off of a stint with the DoD. I worked for them for 2 years in DC, And I created a network-based risk assessment for planning use. It was the first iteration of a quantitative risk assessment, because right now it's entirely qualitative, which I think is always kind of a disarming thing to hear. With Nat Geo, we just completed the first chemical pollution study on Mount Everest. We had some undergrads and grad students go to the top of the mountain and take samples where we found microplastics and PFAS. And I'll be talking a little bit more about it, but I'm also a If Then Fellow with AAAS, who put out Science Magazine. And in that capacity, I've been on Mission Unstoppable, and they have a new statue exhibit they just put together. So we'll be talking about that. This is just a little smattering of publications. Sometimes I put these up to justify my presence in science, as unfortunately is still sometimes necessary. Looks like these are both soft copies, but these have both since been published. And during my PhD, I was the first one to do a risk assessment for glacial meltwater. And I'll be sharing a little bit about that. It was a novel concept because the thought that glacial meltwater is the cleanest on Earth is definitely still pervasive. And that is a concept that's only possible if all systems are not connected. So we'll get into that. So I had the opportunity to go to Antarctica with the Columbia research team on the long-term ecological research in, goodness, what was it now? 2014, 2015, I think. This is a...
I'm sorry to interrupt. Can you hit present on that? Because we're just still stuck on that first slide. So I want to make sure that we're getting to see.
Yeah, I'm in the present mode. So if it's not...
Yeah, it's not moving along for us.
Let me, hold on just a second. I'm going to switch up everything. How's this? Better?
You may want to stop sharing and then reshare, because we're still kind of in the preview version of your slides. There we go.
Better?
That's it. Yay.
That's great. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for interrupting me. So these are papers. Here you go. Papers. Wrote these. Okay, Antarctica. So the trend throughout all of these is I don't have a ton of pictures of myself. I often go into the field either by myself or with a tiny team. I've also been stuck on glaciers during blizzards, and cell phone batteries don't love that. So this is one of the rare pictures of me in Antarctica. You can see the icebergs behind us. On the left, the photo's a little old, so it's a little blurry, but this is when the Brits took us skiing at the British Antarctic base. They took us in this amazing over glacier rover and let us go skiing down glaciers. So that was a pretty fun adventure. And down there during the LTER, it's a National Science Foundation sponsored yearly cruise that goes from Chile down to Palmer Station, which is only accessible by boat. And we were profiling the impact of climate change on a variety of vertebrate and invertebrate species across that entire expanse. These are pictures from Canada, from Banff National Park, where I was attempting to do a follow-up study to one of my committee members who had first identified this higher level of pollution, especially organic chlorides like DDT in glaciers. I wasn't able to duplicate his results, which was kind of an interesting finding, but I did have the opportunity to spend a month and a half looking at these beautiful lakes. And again, very rare picture of me in the field. I don't share this with wide audiences because it's not the greatest picture, but that's us placing lipid-coated membranes in the water. So the membrane will scavenge pollutants from the glacial meltwater and trap only the pollutants and let all the other water go through. It's a pretty ingenious sampling device. And I actually took this picture. It's just crazy. You can find these images on Google pretty easily, and they're almost always from this incredible angle, but this is what it looks like in real life. So highly recommended when folks are vaccinating and can go. So in Alaska, this is kind of one of my legendary stories. We went to go take ice core, as you can see on the left. This is actually our second attempt. We were successful in taking an ice core. Behind me are tens of boxes of ice cores that were taken from a glacier called Jarvis in the eastern Alaska Range, which is just south of Fairbanks. The first attempt we made, we got stuck in an 8-day blizzard. We lost 2 tents, mine which was the first, and a bunch of food blew down the glacier. And at that point, I think the team was pretty much convinced that the glacier was cursed, but then bad weather and severe melting and impacts the following couple of years kind of reiterated this silly but strong belief that we all had. That's a picture from the helicopter on the right after the blizzard had cleared. Obviously, I don't have any blizzard pictures. Sometimes I show a blank slide and make a joke that that's how white it was. On the left, this is us getting packed up. So everything has to go into this Cessna. There are, I believe, only 5, maybe more now, but at the time there were only 5 Cessnas in Alaska that were approved to carry all of our gear, and the snowmobile. So on the right, you can see our tents. Mine on the far left, it's the lowest and was the first to get covered by snow. And then the snowmobile, that actually fit in the airplane and had to have its own trip, I think. So there were 4 trips between the airport and the glacier, each taking about an hour to an hour and a half. So getting on glacier is a whole day affair. By the time that you are there, you've got your tents pitched, it's nighttime. And then for us, the blizzard started the next morning, which is obviously not ideal, nor is it normal. That's a close-up of the ice core, and this is the drilling rig. This is from a different project, but this gives you an idea of what the drilling rig looks like. This is a multi-million-dollar endeavor. So the idea of this ice melting sends people into an absolute panic, which means that sometimes there are refrigerated trucks that are driven to and from really remote places in an effort to make sure that this million-dollar ice that we're losing doesn't melt. Remember, this ice is one of the only ways that we can record the atmosphere from up to 1 million years ago, maybe not that far, a couple 100,000 years ago. So it's really important that we get these records, especially before glaciers see significant melt and the records are either corrupted or completely lost. So I talked about the risk assessment that I did on glacial meltwater. It was the first of its kind. I did one in Switzerland and found that the DDT, okay, so let me back up a little bit. So DDT gets to these glaciers through atmospheric distribution. So when my mom was a kid in Louisiana, they used to spray DDT everywhere. They would dance through it, which I think is responsible for my allergies. They would dance through it and they would have almost, direct uptake, and it would get all over the environment. Well, eventually all of that made its way to the poles, both poles, and started to fall out of the atmosphere because of the cold temperatures and basically because it can easily attach to snow. So what that means is that there's a disproportionate number of these chemicals, organic chlorine chemicals, including DDT, on glaciers all over the world, in the Alps, but specifically in the poles. And so I did a risk assessment looking at DDT in the Alps and then also looking in Alaska. And what I found, I think no one in this group will be surprised, is that because there is a large community of folks in Alaska and northern Canada that are still practicing subsistence and eat a lot of the local salmon and maybe have special permits to eat more salmon than other communities, that the risk of cancer was actually significantly higher to those communities because of the DDT and glacier melt. Now, this was published in Nature, which was great because I had many detractors along the way explaining to me how clean the glacier water was. But it was also a little bit of a sad result because I didn't get a lot of traction in the policy world. There didn't seem to be a lot of folks who were interested in understanding what the impacts to the native corporations were. And I think that's definitely still a point of issue and contention all over the world as to who is dealing with the greatest risks and impacts from climate change, and if anyone in government and policy cares about that. Okay, moving on. So more recently, as I mentioned, we worked with National Geographic on Mount Everest. On the left, you'll see a wonderful picture from 2019. That was an in-person meeting, which looks so fun now. And that was actually at HQ in National Geographic. And on the right is a picture of the Khumbu Glacier on Mount Everest. This was taken by one of the grad students that I mentor who did all of the sampling work for me. I'll head off any questions right now. Unfortunately, I was unable to go. I was invited, but the DoD did not see fit to let me go. So I didn't make this trip. But on a side note, sitting at the base camp of Mount Everest for a month and a half didn't sound like the funnest thing. So maybe I got the best end of the bargain. So this is, as I mentioned, the grad student that I was working with, Heather Clifford. She was in the National Geographic movie about this expedition. It's on Disney Plus. And those are two of our research assistants from the Nepali University. And on the right, you'll see pictures from base camp. So basically what we discovered is that Mount Everest is indeed a very high altitude amount of garbage and refuse. And this was picked up by GQ and Washington Post and a number of other outlets discussing what we found and what that basically means. Either that the gear that you can see there, I mean, look at these lines of climbers, is shedding. Also, the folks who unfortunately have been left, or their gear that has been left, is shedding contaminants and plastics, or it would be atmospheric deposition. We felt like the concentrations were so high and comparable to other locations like the Swiss Alps that there's no way it could have just been from atmospheric deposition. So it seems as though there is potentially a permanent or at least long-term footprint on Mount Everest of all the nasties that we carry around as people. I guess I'm having a little bit of a hard time transitioning here. I've got this cute tweet, so I think we'll just go ahead and move on. This was also in the Smithsonian. The other thing, a couple other things that we found, we've got a new chemical paper coming out that potentially lead from helicopters is amassing on top of Mount Everest, and that the air is getting thicker because of the way that the troposphere and the stratosphere are responding to climate change. Again, happy to discuss any of these in length and greater detail, but we'll just leave it at the very high level for now. I did share this because this is more related to the if-then stuff, and I'm not sure how I dropped it on this slide, but there was a surprise moment a couple months ago, I guess February 11th, where John Kerry tweeted out about the work that I had done in Antarctica and Mount Everest. So that was probably the most excited maybe I've ever been. So then the next thing I want to talk about is the if-then ambassadorship. So Lyda Hill, who is not a well-known character, but I believe is somewhere among the richest women in the world. She has always kept a low profile and has been doing philanthropy for a number of years. She's got a number of science museums that she has sponsored, including the big one in Dallas. And she decided to start a new program with AAAS that she has funded to get the profiles and science work of 125 women from all over the United States elevated in order to give young women and young men role models in the science field. So over the past 2 years, especially because with coronavirus, we've been trying to do everything from home. There's been a number of cool stuff that's gone out. On the left, you can see a calendar where we all dress like Disney princesses. I am the second one, and I am Anna, which seems relevant because it was from Frozen. On the right, that was again when we were in person and they were making demo videos for us, which have been shared across a number of different platforms, but it was a really neat experience to do some really high level filming. And then I've had a number of experiences since then, the opportunities to do that. They just released 10 days ago, something like that. I think it was 10 days ago, a statue garden that they've put together in Dallas. So prior to 10 days ago, There were 6 statues of women in the United States. All the rest were dudes. And now there are 125 more. The one on the left is my statue, but there are some really cool ones with people holding the equipment from their jobs and really incredible women. So I recommend that you at least check it out online. I think there's a digital tour. And then eventually, I'm sure, we'll be able to go to Dallas and check it out. On the right was from a shoot we did for CBS Mission Unstoppable, which is a science show on Saturday mornings. I think it was up for a couple Emmys. I don't think it won any. And that is Fig O'Reilly. I was told after the shooting that Fig O'Reilly is actually a runner-up for Miss Universe. She was Miss Ireland the year before. So I was very grateful to not know that during the shooting, because I was trying to paddle and talk science and did not need to think about how I was hanging out with a Miss Universe runner-up. And she has been the correspondent for the entire season of Mission Unstoppable this year. She's also a NASA Datanaut, which is a way that NASA does outreach and also obviously data analytics. So yesterday I got a text message from a collaborator, and she found this in the Montana Science Center. I had no idea that this was there. My parents live in Montana, so I'm hoping to go see it in July. I guess this is an interactive exhibit. I'm interested to see what happens when you hit those buttons. Hopefully it sounds cool and smart. But this is one of the things that the Lyda Hill Philanthropies put together, is that they've done these exhibits in science museums across the country. I just didn't know I was in one of them. So that was kind of a neat little finding that I've been trying to share around today. So I wanted to cap this off with a discussion on what we're doing at NASA right now. In my team, I am working with a joint Arctic NASA ESA, which is the European Space Agency project. The intention was for us to have a ton of meetings in southern Italy, and it was going to be really fancy and amazing. Obviously, we have done none of that. So what I've been doing for my part is just writing a lot. We've got 2 papers into Nature right now. Hopefully they'll be published soon. And then we were lucky enough to have a collaborator who is allowed to travel, go and get a permafrost core on Saturday. So I'm going to be able to do a little bit of lab work and a little bit of novel research this summer. But what we're generally looking at is that the Arctic is changing very rapidly, and we believe it's already crossed the tipping point towards a reversible change. These are some images from last year. This is the Spalti Glacier on Greenland disintegrating. A paper came out from Greenland today that shows that as these glaciers are being lost, there's also a dispersion of mercury that's going into the near environment, so not great. I don't know if you all remember these holes. These were reported as mysterious holes and no one knew what was going on. Well, we knew it's permafrost and the methane, CH4, that is accumulating in the permafrost as little microbes wake up, start eating carbon and emitting methane. And then there's explosions because of this buildup of methane underneath the surface. The other thing that happens when these microbes start mobilizing because of the thaw of the permafrost is that you get a lot of wetlands. So we're moving from a frozen, maybe even dry, because you are not having a lot of areas reach the melting point, Arctic, to a wetland style Arctic, where you've got a lot of water that's on the surface and that's moving into the permafrost, leading to significant abrupt thaw across the entire Arctic, but specifically in the North American Arctic. The other thing that we've been interested in and what we're looking for in the permafrost core that I mentioned to you is all the little bugs that are still alive and have been trapped for hundreds of thousands to up to 1 million years. One group found an active, alive microbe from 101 million years ago. Okay, so if you think about what was going on the planet before 101 million years ago, it's really, really interesting and potentially scary to think about those things rejoining us in the modern world. So what does that really mean? These bugs are called extremophiles. So they basically have a bunch of adaptations that help them to function. It could be a lipid membrane, it could be DNA repair mechanisms. There's a number of different opportunities that they have developed over, gosh, 1 million years to maintain presence in the permafrost, which, you know, again, would be totally fine, except now they are waking up. There are viruses and bacteria that we know about and who we have interacted with from anthrax to the Black Plague. On the right, you'll see there was an anthrax outbreak in Russia in 2016, I believe. And it's unclear where it came from. The argument is it came from reindeer. It's unclear. The unknown bacteria, viruses, and microbes, which I do believe is a true black swan event, that could be emergent. Those are the things we're talking about that are thousands of years to millions of years old. Antibiotic resistance has almost been ubiquitous in some of these older microbes as well, which is a significant concern if any of them decide that they're going to interact with humans and other mammals in a way that we don't prefer. Other eradicated diseases that we have usually buried people in permafrost, we have stored in permafrost, but those include Black Plague, Black Death, smallpox, and as I mentioned, anthrax. So I skipped straight to the emergent hazards straight to the impacts here. I'm more than happy again to talk about mechanisms of dispersion, but the changes in the Arctic that I've been talking about with wetlands, with thawing, with emergence of all these different microbes does change the food availability because it changes the migration patterns, the adaptability, and the ability for what we consider food to live in the Arctic. The health impacts, I think, are very straightforward from the release of chemicals and bioaccumulation, not only from DDT, but also from increasing mercury, like they just discovered is moving through Greenland and came out last year, is moving through Alaska. Potential of microbes that we don't know how they impact people. And then the oil and chemical industry in the north, which, believe it or not, is still expansive. So that includes everything from the middle picture you can see in integrating and installing more pipelines to either unnecessary unintended or intended dispersion of chemicals. One of the papers that we have in for review to Nature right now documents the intended release of nuclear waste into the Arctic, and it is substantial. It's incredible. Between the Europeans, the Russians, and the US government, we've put a lot of nuclear waste in the Arctic that is now melting out and becoming emergent again. So adaptation is basically what I am constantly talking about. Tipping points are also something that I'm really wanting to focus on in my science communication. The idea that we have already crossed the tipping point for the Arctic, that the sea ice that is 4 to 10 to 100 years old is gone, and there's no ability to regrow that sea ice because of the warm temperatures in the atmosphere. Now you're saying the same thing for permafrost, you're saying the same thing for glaciers. If we don't have cooler temperatures or regular precipitation in these environments, you're not going to be able to stabilize them, which means that the tipping point or the threshold has been crossed and you are permanently in a different environment. Now that begs the question of what happens with old organizations interacting with modern ecology, specifically in the permafrost, but there are some conversations going on around the paraglacial environment. So where the glacier meets the soil and they kind of abut, there's all sorts of interesting stuff that's going on in there as well. And the conversation about what happens when those are exposed is also definitely emergent. You can see on the right, there is a seed bank that is pretty much in the news often because the permafrost below it is thawing, which is not great since that's supposed to be our fail-safe for human civilization. So the idea that we have taken for granted for generations that the Arctic is frozen and the Antarctic is frozen and we are able to store things there, we're able to do things there, integrated with that frozen environment, is really just no longer true. And this is the message that a number of us in this field are trying to share as quickly as possible that climate change has already happened. 2050 is not a reasonable goal, and that this is something that needs to be dealt with today, right now, or we're going to lose more ecosystems, and it's going to happen fast. So on that delightful note, I've been trying to get people to call me Dr. Doom for a while now. It has not stuck, but I would encourage this group to consider it. These are just some fun things that we've put out through NASA, and you are more than welcome to make your own. Boarding pass to Mars. But I'd love to open the conversation and see if there's questions. It looks like I think we've got about 13, 14 questions. So I'd like to go ahead and stop, and we can have a broader conversation here. Thank you so much for letting me speak today, and I hope that I have shared something that is of use to you in your Tuesday.
Dr. Doom, I love it. I mean, I don't love it, but I kind of love it. So yeah, folks, if you've got any questions, please feel free to drop them in the chat. I already have a few that have come in just directly to me. The first one is, they're curious, Julianne's curious to know what kind of projects you hope to work on in the next 5 years.
Interesting. I guess I want to keep the SciComm up, but I'd like to continue to elevate it. I'd like to continue to reach out to policy level as opposed to, just children's museums. I think the Arctic is still very much of interest to me, and I'm starting to formulate and work on a tipping point conversation that would include emergent data, new data from NASA on coral reefs and on forest degradation. So talking about how these small disturbances and microecosystem changes are fingering out and becoming these large tipping points, oftentimes without us even noticing.
Gotcha. Lisa is asking, if 2050 is not soon enough, what year is a practical goal to get to net zero?
Well, so I think practical is the issue, right? I think we always say yesterday is the right time. 1985, when Michael Mann testified before Congress and I was born, was the right time. 2030, I think, is a necessary timeline, but I'm not sure how realistic it is for the economic component of that.
So kind of along that same line, I'm jumping ahead. I see some others coming through the chat, but I had another one. What do you think corporations can do, or how can they use your findings to do better?
So I was really disappointed by Patagonia and North Face. So the Washington Post, GQ, the Smithsonian, that I know of, and I think maybe a couple other agencies, reached out to them directly for comments about our Mount Everest results. And they basically were like, we've changed our chemicals, so it's probably not as big a deal. Have a good day. I was expecting more from them, and I was really disappointed that that was their response. I think that there needs to be both a future looking and a retroactive responsibility from corporations. What are your goals for the future to not only decarbonize, but also, keep some of the refuse that we're putting into the wild environment to ourselves in our small ecosystems. But also, how do you retroactively fix what you've done, right? Like, I would have loved to have heard from some of these companies that they wanted to help with cleanup efforts, or that they were considering the long-term impacts and they were going to help offset that, something like that, that integrated their responsibility to what happens when you generate wealth unmitigated.
Following in that, we have two kind of that line up together, basically saying, how do you stay positive and keep working when it seems like maybe we've already passed that tipping point? And then Madison, kind of in that same line, was saying she wonders if you're optimistic that there are ways to mitigate adverse effects of climate change.
So I don't stay positive. I guess I see myself a little bit as like when I'm telling myself mythology, I see myself a little bit as a John Henry character. Like I'm just going to give this all I got, and I don't know if there's a chance, but I'm going to put everything into it. I think that it's important to me to share the correct information, and it's important to me to preserve wild places. And recently what that's meant is going into these wild places on the weekends, for example, and remembering why I'm doing this. And that does help keep me going. Though I'm not positive. I don't feel positive about this. I do feel it's critical. And I do feel if I could make a difference, then that will be a positive net result. I think that it's hard to think about these things, but I guess I'm willing to do it because it's so, so important to me that, you know, that bird and that tree and that part of the Arctic be preserved and be saved. What was it? And Holly said, for ourselves, the people we care about, and those yet to come, which I thought was absolutely stunning way to say it. So that's what keeps me going, even on the days when I am disappointed. I think that if we were seeing some kind of like rapid movement coming together, similar to we did to ozone hole, you know, in Happy Feet, there's an image where the UN is everyone's raising their hands and working for action. I think that if that were happening, I would feel a little bit more positive. But as it is, I'm just trying to make an impact in my tiny corner of the world. And many of you, I'm sure, are doing the same thing, and maybe with more success than I've had. But that's how I'm tracking it.
Yeah, I think we've got a group full of folks that sort of can sympathize, empathize, all of the above. So next question comes in from Rachel, and she says, what kind of policy changes are you most interested in advocating for? She said she loved the point on advocating for frontline communities.
Sure. I guess if I were to set, you know, towards the end of my life, one thing that I did that was a really big deal is I would love to advocate for policies that keep the human stuff where it should be. So that includes not having roads that drain to the bay. That includes not just releasing carbon and plastics into the atmosphere. So limiting the amount of refuse that goes into the environment so that we have some amount of human community and then some amount of wildlands. And if they're not entirely separate, at least we're not, you know, using our face wash is not ending up in the wildlands. I think that would be a really big long-term goal for me, is illustrating the importance of keeping our refuse where it is. And you know, if we can make it a donut economics thing where we're reusing things and we're recycling things, all the better. But my goal is to keep the wildlands cleaner, wilder, happier than they currently are.
I love that, keeping human stuff where it belongs. Okay, kind of switching gears a little bit. Do you have any advice for women wanting to get into your field?
Sure. I guess I would need a follow-up if you're talking about climate change, or if you're talking about going out and putting boots on the ground wherever there is to put boots on the ground.
How about both?
Okay. Well, I guess if you want to be a climate scientist, that's basically schooling is the only route. There's a number of folks getting into the field who don't have the science background, which is fine, but then that's more of a policy impacts kind of conversation. So it's both are important. But if you want to do the hard science side, that's the hard work of multiple years of reading papers by OWGs and others. Going out into the wilderness, I think there's lots of opportunities. I'm constantly posting the US Antarctica project. I've got a number of women friends who work for them, and every year they hire seasonal workers to either just do summer work or to overwinter. So you could do almost anything. Like you could clean, you could do lab tech work, and have the opportunity to go to Antarctica. The same is true of Toolik Station, which is a National Science Foundation station in Alaska. I was a wildland firefighter for a while, which took, goodness, a week of training and then getting hired after that. So there's a lot of different ways to engage. I would be more than excited, clearly, to talk about this with anybody. Natural field schools. So hit me up if you're interested in the exploration science thing. More than happy to chat about what the current opportunities are, what's on my radar, and some long-term strategies as well.
Well, it appears that Helen is volunteering all of us for a Women in Climate Tech field trip, and everybody.
Let's do that. We should go somewhere super cool, like the Northern Canadian islands.
Oh, sign me up.
Oh my God, sign me up.
Okay, everyone get vaccinated and then we'll regroup.
I'll say at this point, I think we would sign up to go just about anywhere.
Right?
Just to go. All right, let me go back in my list here. Here's a fun one. What was your most interesting finding, or like, what was the craziest thing you've ever come across on your Arctic adventures?
So the Everest stuff was a little bit of a surprise. We weren't even looking for the PFAS, which is the residual, it's like Teflon from the gear. I think the microplastics team was looking for microplastics, but we were looking for DDT because we knew it was going to be there. This was just going to be like, a small low ball paper, whatever. So I was shocked to see how much the gear was shedding. And that was interesting. It's basically, I think bad things are interesting now. So that was interesting. The other thing was the risk assessment. I ran that risk assessment multiple times over multiple weeks and had folks from the EPA double check me because I was really surprised to see that there would be an impact from DDT and glacial meltwater to some communities. And because we'd already published in Switzerland that there wasn't an impact, that was one of the things that I was trying to be really, really careful about. Luckily, nature thought it was good enough to pass the bar, which is a nice little, I don't know, moments of feeling like somebody else gets what you're trying to do. So that was good. I think both of those things were interesting for me and very, very negative. Dr. Doom, right?
Well, I guess somebody has to be that person, but Rachel is now asking, what does it mean that the gear is shedding? Can you engineer gear that doesn't shed?
Sure. Okay. I'm trying to see if I have anything around. I don't. Okay. So if you have camping gear or a coat and you put it in a tote or you leave it outside for multiple days, you'll see that the outside coating kind of starts to peel a little bit. Just like if you take a Teflon pan and you are using metal with it and it kind of starts to scratch off. So every one of those tiny little pieces goes somewhere. So when we say it's shedding, it means that all the different parts on the outside that are keeping you waterproof, saving your life on Mount Everest, right? Keeping you warm, dry, and healthy, are going into the near environment. And I think that's still true of outdoor gear. That was part of what I wanted the conversation to be like with the producers, but it never went that way. There are some newer chemicals that are on the gear that may or may not be as significant. But if you think about it, we developed a slew of chemicals in World War II, applied them to crops right afterwards, including DDT. And then we go, hey, this is not a good chemical. We're going to develop 3 more to replace it. Oh my gosh, these are all bad. Okay, let's develop 3 more for each one to replace it. So you end up with this kind of like tree model of the number of chemicals that we've developed over time. And each iteration isn't necessarily better than the last, but now there are so many iterations of chemicals out in the world that it's almost impossible to test for all of them under normal funding structures. So it's the PFAS that we found, this old legacy Teflon type thing. There's new stuff, some of which we did find that has replaced it, but there's no real indication to me personally that this is also not shedding. So something to think about. Obviously, all of us would pack our trash, but for the folks who don't pack their trash, this is what's happening, is it's slowly starting to move into the environment in smaller and smaller pieces. And I did see it pop up. JC said similar to microplastics, and that's absolutely correct. So microplastics are very similar. They just get smaller and smaller and smaller pieces and don't biodegrade. So you end up, what was it? It was, my boss yesterday said he saw a paper that came out that there were 70 parts per million in each cubic centimeter in kelp forests in California of microplastics. I think those were the correct numbers. Don't quote me on it, but if you'd like to see that paper, I'm happy to find it for anybody.
So this follows up with another one we got is what are your go-to items that you pack for your explorations?
So I use the same gear everybody else does. I am out there shedding. I am out there leaving a residual impact. On a nicer note, what I prefer to use is Vibram soles. That's what firefighters use, and it's almost impenetrable, so that if you step on something, it's not going to go through and hurt your foot. So those are really good things to have on boots. I do usually do layers like everybody else. Polyester is obviously better than cotton for wicking. If there was a cotton alternative, I think that would be a great option. And then in this conversation that has been emergent since this Mount Everest trip, folks have suggested things similar to Carhartts, or merino wool was just suggested. So different compounds that are natural do have the properties for insulation and a little bit of wicking and a little bit of water, making them hydrophobic, basically. What is that called in real people words? Waterproofing. I'm sorry. Waterproofing.
I love it. I love it.
Hydrophobic. What is that word?
Well, I think we might have time for one more question, and I think it's a good one to wrap up on. And it was, who has been your biggest mentor?
So it's actually been interesting. I've been thinking a lot about that in the last few years. I have been blessed with some amazing men who have become mentors for me. In my PhD, there were not a large number of women who I could look to for mentorship. And so my PhD advisor was really the one-stop shop, which was lucky because he was excellent. And my current boss, who obviously will remain unnamed, at NASA, is also excellent, just really pushing me, encouraging me, always there to support. It's also really, really nice to have those male voices because I am frequently dealing with different levels of sexual harassment online, offline, from co-authors, across publications. I just had a publication call me out by name in Science of the Total Environment, which is, I haven't decided if we're going to do a rebuttal to or not, because it's just so silly. So having that male presence has actually been really helpful to me. I'd love to have more female mentors. Maybe that's one of the functions that this group can provide to each other. And I hope to be that person for up and coming women scientists.
Ooh, well, that gave me the goosebumps a little bit. I know that that was Helen and Julianne and Lisa's part of their driving force for this group, was to create that safe space for women in climate tech. And so I appreciate you kind of reiterating the importance of that.